When Comanche war chief Ayana accepted a black woman named Zora as payment for a white settler's debt, he expected to gain another burden for his struggling tribe, but instead found himself bound to a woman whose hidden strength, deadly secrets, and fierce intelligence would either save his people or destroy everything he'd sworn to protect. In a world where survival demanded impossible choices and trust was a luxury few could afford, Zora had already proven she would kill to be free. Dawn broke over a makeshift battlefield. Two armies faced each other across trampled earth. Us, cavalry horses stamped and snorted on one side. On the other, a mixed force of Comanche warriors, escaped slaves, and Mexican vaqueros held their ground. Between them stood a woman in a torn wedding dress. Blood stained the white fabric. Her dark hands gripped a makeshift flag of truce. Her eyes burned with desperate determination. "Colonel Morrison," Zora called across the distance, "I invoke parley under military law." The cavalry officer urged his horse forward. His uniform was pristine despite the dust. His face showed no emotion. "I have information about the Apache gold shipment you've been hunting," she continued. Behind her, a Comanche warrior watched from horseback. Ayana's face revealed nothing. His people waited for his signal. This moment balanced on a knife's edge. The colonel's eyes narrowed. He studied the woman who dared stand between armies. But how had they arrived at this impossible standoff? 3 months earlier, the Texas plains stretched endless and unforgiving. Thomas Brennan's homestead sat like a wound in the earth. His crops had withered. His cattle had vanished to raiders in the night. His dreams lay as dead as the corn stalks that rattled in the wind. The sound of approaching horses made him grab his rifle. 4 Comanche warriors crested the hill. They rode with the easy grace of men born to the saddle. Their leader wore no war paint today. This was business. Brennan's hands shook as he lowered his weapon. He had hoped they would forget. Hoped the debt would disappear like morning mist. Ayana dismounted slowly. His boots touched earth with deliberate weight. The other warriors remained mounted. They formed a half circle around the nervous white man. "The horses," Ayana said. His English carried only the faintest accent. "And the rifles," as agreed. Brennan's throat worked like a man trying to swallow dust. "I don't have them." The words hum in the air. A hawk circled overhead. Its cry sounded like judgment. "The drought killed everything," Brennan continued. "Raiders took what was left. I've got nothing to give you." Ayana's dark eyes surveyed the failing homestead, the sagging fence posts, the empty corrals, the desperation that clung to everything like smoke. His people were dying, not from bullets or disease this time, from hunger, from the slow starvation that came when the buffalo were gone and the reservation land grew nothing but stones. "You have something," Ayana said finally. Brennan followed his gaze to the cabin. Through the window, a woman moved in the shadows. She prepared the midday meal with efficient motions. Her presence steadied the chaos of his failing world. "She's free," Brennan said quickly. "I freed her after the war, but she owes me. Room and board. Protection. Years of it." Zora emerged from the cabin. She carried herself with quiet dignity, despite her simple dress. Her eyes took in the mounted warriors without fear. She assessed the situation like a person accustomed to calculating danger. She had learned to read faces long before she learned to read words. This Comanche leader carried himself differently than most men. No swagger, no cruelty hiding behind his eyes, just tired determination. "I won't go," she said simply. Ayana studied her. "You have a choice?" The question cut deeper than intended. Zora's jaw tightened. She had been making impossible choices her entire life. Each one had cost her something precious. "I always have a choice," she replied. Brennan stepped between them. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air. "She's worth more than horses. She can read, write, knows medicine. She's educated." The words made Zora's hands clench. She had hidden her abilities for years. Now they were being bartered like livestock. Ayana saw the flash of anger in her eyes. It disappeared quickly. Too quickly. This woman had learned to mask her feelings. The skill spoke of hard lessons. His youngest warrior shifted restlessly in his saddle. Their people needed those horses, needed the rifles to hunt and defend themselves. Winter approached like a stalking wolf. Grandmother Willow's words echoed in his memory. The old woman saw things others missed. Her last vision had been troubling. "The woman who comes in chains will either save us all or destroy what little remains of our people." At the time, he had dismissed it as the ramblings of old age. Now he wondered. Zora stepped forward. She moved with unconscious grace. "What exactly are you offering, Mr. Brennan?" The white man's face flushed. "Your debt. All of it. Paid in full. You be free to go wherever you want." "After I serve them," she said. "It's temporary," Brennan insisted. "Just until they get settled somewhere." Lies came easily to desperate men. Zora had heard enough of them to recognize the sound. But she also saw something else. The Comanche leader's people were starving. She could see it in the careful way they conserved their movements, in the sharpness of their cheekbones. Ayana dismounted completely. He approached until he stood close enough to speak quietly. "I will not take an unwilling woman." His words carried weight. Zora believed him. The realization surprised her. "But my people are dying," he continued. "We need what he owes us." The honest admission hung between them. No threats, no manipulation, just truth offered like a gift. Zora looked back at the cabin that had been her prison for 3 years. Then Brennan, who had never looked at her as anything more than useful property. Finally at the Comanche warriors, who waited with patient dignity for her decision. "If I come with you," she said slowly, "what would be expected of me?" "To live," Ayana replied. "To contribute what you can. To be part of something worth preserving." The wind picked up. It carried the scent of sage and distant rain, change approaching whether they willed it or not. Zora made her choice the way she always did, by calculating which path offered the best chance of survival. But for the first time in years, one of those paths also offered something that looked like hope. "I accept," she said. Ayana nodded once. "Then you come as my equal, not as payment for another man's debt." Brennan started to protest, but the look in the Comanche leader's eyes silenced him. Some lines could not be crossed without consequences. Zora gathered her few possessions, a worn Bible, a small leather pouch containing herbs, the forged papers that claimed her freedom. She touched each item like a talisman against an uncertain future. When she emerged, Ayana had brought a horse close to the porch, a gentle mare with kind eyes. He helped Zora mount with careful respect for her dignity. As they rode away from the failing homestead, Zora did not look back. Behind her lay years of barely disguised slavery. Ahead waited the unknown, but the man riding beside her had offered her something precious, a chance to matter. The sun climbed higher as they traveled toward the Comanche camp. Neither spoke of the bargain that bound them. Neither mentioned the desperation that had made it necessary. With the growing distance between them and Brennan's homestead, something shifted. Two people carrying invisible wounds had found themselves on the same narrow path. Whether it led to salvation or destruction remained to be seen. The Comanche camp materialized from the landscape like something born from the earth itself. Hide lodges dotted the valley floor. Smoke rose from cooking fires in thin gray ribbons. Children's voices carried on the wind, mixing with the sound of horses and the distant cry of hawks. Zora had expected something different, something savage. Instead, she found a community holding itself together through will and shared purpose. Women looked up from their work as the riders approached. Their faces showed curiosity, not hostility. Old men sat in the shade, their weathered hands busy with repairs to weapons and tools. Everything spoke of a people making do with less than they needed. Ayana dismounted near the largest lodge. An elderly woman emerged. Her hair gleamed silver-white in the afternoon sun. Her eyes held the deep knowing of someone who had witnessed the world change beyond recognition. "Grandmother Willow," Ayana said, "this is Zora." The old woman studied Zora with unsettling intensity. Her gaze seemed to penetrate layers of carefully constructed defenses. Finally, she nodded once. "The one from the vision," Grandmother Willow said. "Welcome, daughter of two sorrows." Zora didn't ask what the words meant. Some knowledge came with a price she wasn't ready to pay. A lodge had been prepared for her, small but clean. Buffalo hides formed the walls. A fire pit sat ready for lighting. Someone had left wildflowers in a clay bowl near the sleeping robes. "You're not what I expected either," Zora said when Ayana showed her the space. He paused in the entrance. "What'd you expect?" "A man who takes women as payment for debts." The words hung between them like smoke. Ayana's jaw tightened slightly, then relaxed. "We are all more than our worst moments," he said. That evening, Zora sat outside her lodge and watched the camp settle into night rhythms. Children played games she didn't recognize. Their laughter reminded her of something she had lost long ago, something she couldn't quite name. A young woman approached. She moved with the careful grace of someone accustomed to hiding pain. Her left arm hung at an odd angle, an old injury poorly healed. "I'm Sweet Fox," she said, "Ayana's cousin." Zora nodded. "Zora, the children are sick," Sweet Fox continued without preamble. "Fever, cough. 2 have already died." The simple statement carried enormous weight. In a community this small, every loss cut deep. Children represented the future. Without them, the people faced slow extinction. "Show me," Zora said. They moved through the camp together. Sweet Fox led her to a lodge where low moans drifted through the hide walls. Inside, 3 children lay on sleeping robes. Their mothers knelt beside them with the hollow-eyed look of people watching helplessness. Zora knelt beside the smallest child, a girl of perhaps 5 years. Her breathing came shallow and quick. Her skin burned with fever, but her eyes still tracked movement, still held awareness. "How long?" Zora asked. 3 days for her, the others longer. Zora opened her leather pouch. Inside, wrapped in cloth, lay the herbs she had gathered over years of careful study. Knowledge gleaned from slave quarters and backcountry healers. Wisdom passed down through whispered conversations between women who had learned to doctor their own. "I need hot water," she said, "clean cloth, a pot for brewing." Swift Fox hurried to comply. Word spread through the camp with the speed of wildfire. The newcomer was attempting something. Hope flickered in tired hearts. Zora worked through the night. She brewed willow bark for fever, mixed honey with herbs for the cough, bathed burning foreheads with cool water. She spoke to the children in soft tones, regardless of whether they understood her words. By dawn, the smallest girl's fever had broken. She asked for water in a voice like rustling leaves. Her mother wept without sound. The camp stirred to life around them. Ayanna appeared in the lodge entrance. He took in the scene without comment. 3 children, breathing easier. Mothers allowing themselves to hope again. Zora slumped against a lodge pole, exhausted but alert. "Thank you," he said simply. Over the following days, Zora found her place in the camp's rhythm. She tended the sick, helped with food preparation, listened more than she spoke. The people began to trust her presence. Swift Fox became her constant companion. The young woman's injured arm had been broken by cavalry sabers during a raid. It had healed crooked, leaving her unable to draw a bow or lift heavy objects. But her mind remained sharp. "Teach me the marks," Swift Fox said one afternoon. They sat in the shade between lodges. Zora had been sketching the surrounding hills in the dirt, noting landmarks, calculating distances, old habits from a time when knowing terrain meant survival. "What marks?" "The ones that hold words. Ayanna says you can capture speech on paper." Zora hesitated. Literacy was power. In the wrong hands, it became a weapon. But Swift Fox's earnest desire reminded her of herself at that age, hungry for knowledge, desperate to understand the forces shaping her world. She began with simple letters, drew them in the dirt with a stick. Swift Fox studied each mark with fierce concentration. Other young women drifted closer. Soon Zora found herself teaching a small group. "This is magic," one whispered. "No," Zora corrected. "This is power they tried to keep from you." The distinction mattered. Magic belonged to the realm of spirits and visions. This was earthly knowledge, practical, teachable, revolutionary. Ayanna watched from a distance. He saw in his people learning skills that might help them navigate the changing world. But he also saw something else. The way Zora moved among them like someone finding her way home. She was different from the woman who had ridden into camp a week ago. Less guarded, more present, as if some frozen part of her had begun to thaw. One evening, as they shared a meal by the central fire, Swift Fox asked the question everyone wondered about. "Why did you really come with us?" Zora stared into the flames. They reminded her of other fires, other choices made in desperation. "Because I was tired of being owned," she said finally. And now, Zora looked around the circle, at faces that had become familiar, at children who no longer feared her presence, at Ayanna, who watched her with something that might have been understanding. "Now I'm not sure what I am." The fire crackled. Sparks rose toward stars that looked different here than they had at Brennan's homestead. Brighter, less lonely. A commotion near the camp's edge broke the peaceful moment. Riders approached in the darkness. The guard called out a challenge. The response came in Spanish mixed with Comanche words. 3 men rode into the firelight, Mexican vaqueros by their dress, but their faces showed the hard edges of men accustomed to trouble. The leader dismounted with the careful movements of someone expecting violence. "We need to talk," he said to Ayanna, "about the soldiers coming from the east." The peaceful evening shattered like glass. Everyone understood the implications. The cavalry was moving again. Their brief respite from the endless war was ending. Ayanna stood slowly. "How many?" 2 companies, maybe more, led by a colonel who collects scalps. Zora felt ice form in her stomach. She had heard stories about officers who turned Indian hunting into sport. Men who measured success in body counts rather than peace treaties. "His name?" Ayanna asked. "Morrison." The word hit Ayanna like a physical blow. His hands clenched at his sides. Old grief and newer rage warred across his features. Zora saw the change immediately. The careful control that defined him cracked slightly. Something raw and hurt showed through. "You know him," she said. Ayanna's voice came out flat, empty. "He killed my brother." The simple statement carried the weight of years, of a loss that had carved itself into his soul and never healed properly. Around the fire, the people began to murmur. Fear spread like smoke. They had been running from men like Morrison for too long. They were tired, hurt, unprepared for another fight. But Zara saw something else in their faces, something that reminded her of slaves hearing about runaways who had made it north, a desperate hunger for someone to show them another path. She stood slowly, every eye turned toward her. The newcomer, who had appeared like an answer to prayers they were afraid to speak. "Then we don't run," she said quietly. The words fell into silence. Even the children stopped their whispered conversations. "We make them come to us, on ground we choose, with allies they don't expect." Ayana stared at her. What allies? Zora looked at the Mexican vaqueros, at the mixed-race children playing at the edge of the firelight, at the escaped slaves who had found sanctuary here, at all the people society had discarded and forgotten. "All of us," she said, "everyone they've pushed to the edges, everyone they think doesn't matter." For the first time since the riders had arrived, hope flickered in the darkness, small and fragile, but real. Ayana studied her face in the firelight. This woman who had arrived as payment for a debt was proposing to reshape their entire world. "That's war," he said finally. "No," Zara replied, "that's survival." The wind picked up, stirring the flames higher. In their dance, the future seemed to flicker between possibility and destruction. But for the first time in months, the people of the camp began to believe they might live to see another spring. The letter arrived with the dawn riders, dust-covered men who had ridden hard through the night. Their horses' flanks heaved like bellows. Sweat and desperation clung to them like smoke. Colonel Morrison's messenger wore the crisp uniform of military certainty. He dismounted with parade ground precision despite the early hour. His boots hit earth with the sound of inevitability. Ayana took the sealed paper with steady hands. The wax bore Morrison's personal seal, a scorpion wrapped in barbed wire. The colonel's sense of humor had always run toward the macabre. "He wants to parley," the messenger said. Noon, under white flag. Around the camp, people stopped their morning tasks. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the children sensed the shift in the air, the weight of approaching storm. Zara approached slowly. She read the tension in Ayana's posture, the careful way he held the letter, as if it might bite. "What's it say?" Ayana's jaw worked silently. He handed her the paper without speaking. His silence carried more weight than words. The letter bore Morrison's flowing script, every word chosen for maximum impact. Professional courtesy wrapped around a threat sharp as winter wind. But at the bottom, a postscript in different handwriting. "Shake here," written by someone whose hand trembled. Zora read it twice. Her face went pale. "This is your brother's writing." "The dead don't write letters," Ayana said flatly. "But they did before they died." The distinction cut like a blade. Zora watched Ayana's carefully constructed control begin to crack. The brother he had mourned as a hero, the loss that had driven him to lead his people into this endless flight. "He was captured," she continued gently, "tortured, but before he died, he wrote this." Ayana turned away. His shoulders carried the weight of mountains. "Read it." Zora's voice came soft as falling snow. "Tell my brother the location of the winter camp. Tell him about the hidden canyon where the women and children wait. Tell him, or watch them die one by one." The words hung in the morning air like poison. Around them, the camp continued its daily rhythm, unaware that their world was reshaping itself. "He betrayed us," Ayana whispered. "He was broken first." The difference mattered less than the result. The winter camp had been discovered. 17 women and children had died in Morrison's raid. The canyon Ayana thought was secret had become a killing ground. Zora folded the letter carefully. "Morrison wants you to know. He wants you to carry this." "Why?" "Because dead heroes are easier to live with than broken brothers." Ayana walked to the edge of camp. The plains stretched endlessly in all directions. Somewhere out there, Morrison waited with his cavalry companies, patient as a spider in its web. Zara followed at a distance. She had learned to read the rhythms of grief, when to speak, when to offer silence, when to simply exist nearby like a candle in darkness. "I taught him to shoot," Ayana said finally, "to track, to be a warrior. You taught him to survive. I taught him to die with honor." The bitter irony hung between them. Honor was a luxury the desperate couldn't afford. Survival required choices that hollowed out the soul. "What will you do?" Zora asked. Ayana stared toward the horizon, where dust clouds marked the approach of their enemies. "What I should have done before. Meet Morrison under white flag. And this? Surrender, if necessary." Zora moved closer, not touching, but close enough that her presence registered. "And your people will live. Even as slaves, they'll live." The pragmatism should have been admirable. Instead, it sounded like defeat rehearsed until it became acceptable. "There's another way," Zora said quietly. She had been thinking through the night, planning, calculating odds like a gambler with marked cards. Her mind worked differently than theirs, shaped by different necessities. Morrison expects surrender or flight. He doesn't expect alliance. Ayana turned. Hope and suspicion warred in his expression. What alliance? Every outcast group within 100 miles. Mexican vaqueros tired of being hunted, escaped slaves with nowhere to run. Poor whites squeezed out by bigger ranchers. Buffalo soldiers who've seen too much killing. They won't fight for us. They'll fight for themselves. Morrison represents everything that's pushed them to the margins. The plan took shape as she spoke. Not one desperate band making a final stand, but a coalition of the discarded. People who had nothing left to lose except their lives. It's madness, Ayanna said. So is surrender. They returned to camp together. The morning sun climbed higher. Time contracted to the space between heartbeats. Every decision felt weighted with the future of everyone they protected. Swift Fox met them at the central fire. Her face showed the strain of sleepless night. Around her, other women waited with the patience of people accustomed to crisis. The riders brought more than letters, Swift Fox said. Stories. Morrison's been recruiting, offering bounties for Comanche scalps, making it profitable to hunt us. The words hit like stones, bad enough to face professional soldiers. Worse to know civilians had joined the killing for money. Zora felt old rage stir in her chest, the familiar fire that had sustained her through years of bondage. How much? $50 for warriors, 20 for women, 10 for children. The precise pricing of human life, reduced to market value like cattle or grain. Some part of Zora that had begun to soften turned to iron again. Then we make it expensive, she said. Over the next hours, messengers rode out in all directions. Men and women who knew the network of displaced communities, who understood how to speak to people living in the shadows. By midday, responses began arriving. Dusty riders with weather-beaten faces. People who had learned to trust carefully but commit completely. Miguel Santos arrived with 6 vaqueros. They had been branded horse thieves for refusing to abandon land their families had worked for generations. The new Anglo law said their Spanish grants were invalid. The new Anglo courts said they had no standing to protest. Sarah Running Bear brought 12 escaped slaves, men and women who had found freedom only to discover it came with a price. Constant vigilance, endless flight, the knowledge that capture meant death. Even 3 Buffalo soldiers appeared, deserters who had grown sick of fighting other people's wars for ungrateful officers. They brought military training and insider knowledge of cavalry tactics. By evening, nearly 60 fighters had gathered, an impossible mixture of languages and grievances, united only by their shared exile from respectable society. Zora moved among them like a conductor orchestrating discord into harmony. She spoke to each group in their own terms, found common ground in their common enemies. Ayanna watched from the lodge entrance. This woman who had arrived as payment for debt was transforming his desperate retreat into something resembling an army. You planned this, he said when she approached. I hoped for it. Before Morrison's letter arrived. Zora met his gaze steadily. Men like Morrison don't change. They only get worse. The truth of it settled between them. She had been preparing for this confrontation since the day she arrived, reading the signs, understanding that peace was temporary but war was inevitable. There's something else, she said quietly. From her pouch, she withdrew a folded paper. Different from the others she carried. Older, worn from handling. What is it? The truth about why I was really running. Ayanna took the paper, unfolded it carefully. The writing was official, legal language that spelled out charges and warrants. Murder, he read aloud. My former master, I poisoned him slowly over 6 months, made it look like illness. The confession hung between them like smoke. Another secret revealed. Another layer of carefully constructed identity peeled away. Why? Because he was selling the children, my children, the ones I helped birth and raise. Selling them south where the work was harder and alike shorter. Ayanna folded the paper, handed it back. How many did you save? 17. Then you're not a murderer. You're a protector. The simple reframing shouldn't have mattered, but it did. For the first time in years, Zara felt the weight of justified action rather than hidden guilt. Morrison knows, she continued, about the warrant, about what I did. He'll use it to break our alliance. Let him try. The certainty in Ayanna's voice surprised them both. Somewhere in the process of learning her secrets, he had stopped seeing her as an outsider. She had become his partner in this impossible gamble. Around them, the mixed camp settled into evening rhythms. Cooking fires sent smoke toward stars that looked down on Cherokee and former slaves sharing meals. On Mexican vaqueros teaching Comanche children card games. On Buffalo soldiers cleaning weapons alongside warriors who had once been their enemies. Tomorrow, Ayanna said. Tomorrow, Zora agreed. Neither spoke of the odds they faced. Neither mentioned the probability of failure. Some truths were too large for words. But in the growing darkness, something new was taking shape. Not just an army, not just an alliance. A family forged from the broken pieces of other families, held together by shared purpose and mutual need. Whether it would survive the coming storm remained to be seen, but for the first time in months, survival seemed possible. Dawn broke over the wedding preparation. Women braided wildflowers into Zora's dark hair. Their hands moved with gentle efficiency. No one spoke of the cavalry companies gathering on the horizon. No one mentioned the dust clouds that marked approaching death. Zora wore a dress of white deerskin. Beadwork caught the early light like captured stars. The garment had belonged to Ayana's sister, a woman who died of fever 3 winters past. Wearing it felt like accepting membership in a family defined by loss. Swift Fox painted traditional symbols on Zora's cheeks: protection, fertility, long life. The irony wasn't lost on either woman. They might not survive the day. "You know this is a trap," Swift Fox said quietly. "I'm counting on it." The wedding ceremony would take place at noon, in the center of camp. Visible from the surrounding hills where Morrison's scouts watched through field glasses, the colonel expected them vulnerable, distracted by celebration. He was half right. Ayana stood near the central fire. His wedding clothes were simple but dignified. Dark cloth and silver ornaments that caught light like promises. His face showed the calm of a man who had made peace with necessary choices. Miguel Santos approached with his hat in his hands. The vaqueros are in position, hidden in the rocks to the south. The Buffalo Soldiers? North Ridge. They know cavalry tactics better than anyone. Ayana nodded. Their mixed army had deployed during the night, invisible to watchers who expected only Comanche warriors. Morrison would find himself surrounded by enemies he didn't know existed. Grandmother Willow emerged from her lodge. She carried the sacred items needed for the ceremony: sage for cleansing, sweet grass for blessing, a pipe that had witnessed 50 years of marriages and funerals. "The spirits are restless today," she said. "Good," Ayana replied. "So are we." At precisely noon, the ceremony began. The mixed community gathered in a circle. Comanche words blended with Spanish prayers and African songs of binding. Languages that had been forbidden in other places found harmony here. Zora and Ayana stood facing each other. The fire burned between them and the watching hills. Smoke rose straight up in the still air, a signal visible for miles. Grandmother Willow spoke the ancient words, about two people choosing to walk the same path, about strength found in unity, about love that grew from shared purpose rather than easy passion. As she spoke, Morrison's cavalry crested the hills. They moved with practiced precision, companies spreading to surround the camp, sabers reflecting sunlight like scattered diamonds. Morrison himself rode at the center. His uniform was immaculate, despite the dust. His face showed the satisfaction of a hunter closing on wounded prey. At the wedding fire, Ayana took Zora's hands. "Whatever happens, you gave my people hope. We gave each other truth." The cavalry charged. Hoofbeats thundered across the plain. War cries split the air. Morrison's men expected to find terrified civilians clustered around cooking fires. Instead, they rode into carefully prepared crossfire. Vaqueros rose from concealment. Their rifles spoke with disciplined precision. Buffalo soldiers emerged from the rocks. Military training turned against military targets. The charge faltered. Horses screamed and fell. Men who had expected easy victory found themselves fighting for survival. Morrison rallied his troops with shouted commands. He was a professional soldier. He adapted quickly to changing circumstances, but he had never faced an enemy like this. In the center of chaos, the wedding continued. Grandmother Willow's voice never wavered. Sacred words competed with gunfire, ancient promises spoken over modern violence. Zara felt a strange peace settle over her, not the absence of fear, but the presence of certainty. She had found her place in the world, standing beside a man who valued her mind as much as her courage. Morrison broke through the outer defenses. He rode straight toward the wedding fire. His saber was drawn. His face showed the rage of a man who had been outmaneuvered. "Ayana," he shouted, "your brother died screaming your name." The taunt was designed to break focus, to turn ceremony into chaos. Morrison had used similar psychological warfare throughout his career. Ayana didn't respond. He completed the ritual binding, tied the sacred cord around his and Zora's joined hands, made the promises that mattered more than bullets. Morrison reached the fire circle. His horse reared. Hooves struck sparks from stone. The colonel raised his saber like judgment incarnate. Zora moved, not toward cover, toward Morrison. Her hand found the pistol hidden in her wedding dress, the weapon Miguel had insisted she carry. The shot echoed across the battlefield. Morrison's saber fell from nerveless fingers. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his pristine uniform. Surprise replaced rage on his features. "Impossible," he whispered. "Inevitable," Zara corrected. Morrison fell from his horse. hit the ground with the solid thump of finished things. Around the battlefield, his remaining men began to withdraw. Professional soldiers knew when a fight was lost. The wedding guests slowly emerged from cover. Some were wounded, all were changed. They had fought together against impossible odds, won through unity rather than individual strength. Grandmother Willow completed the ceremony, spoke the final words that made two people into one family. The sacred and the violent blended into something new. 6 months later, Zura walked among the graves, her belly rounded with the promise of new life. The child kicked restlessly, as if eager to join the world its parents were building. The cemetery held friend and enemy alike. Comanche warriors lay beside buffalo soldiers. Mexican vaqueros shared earth with cavalry troopers. Death had made equals of them all. Morrison's grave stood apart, marked by a cross that seemed to embody contradictions. Comanche's sacred wood formed the upright. Nails from a slave ship held the crosspiece. Past and present joined in uncomfortable unity. Ayana approached quietly. His legs still bore the mark of a cavalry saber. He moved with careful precision. Pain had become his constant companion. "Why do you come here?" he asked. Zura placed her hand on her swollen belly, felt the child respond to her touch, life asserting itself over death. "Because I want our baby to understand the difference between justice and revenge." She turned toward their settlement. Smoke rose from cooking fires, where impossible families shared meals. Children played games that blended three traditions, languages mixed like rivers joining the sea. "Do you regret any of it?" Zora considered the question, the bodies they had buried, the choices that couldn't be undone, the future they had purchased with blood and determination. "I regret everything I had to become before I met you." She walked away, left Ayana standing beside the grave of the man who had nearly destroyed them, who had in death given them the enemy they needed to forge unity. The wind carried children's laughter. Three languages blending into something that sounded like hope, like possibility, like the future taking root in ground that had known too much death. For the first time in months, Ayana allowed himself to believe in tomorrow. The cross cast its shadow across Morrison's grave, sacred wood and slave ship nails. Justice and revenge intertwined so closely that telling them apart required wisdom he wasn't sure he possessed. But the children's laughter continued, life asserting itself despite everything. Perhaps that was answer enough. And that is all to the story. For now, please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.